What up, crowdfunders? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. If you've never listened to the show before, my name is Salvador Briggman. I run the website crowdcrux.com, and I've been in this industry for a while now, since 2012, really documenting stories as it relates to what works well when it comes to crowdfunding. So when I was first getting started, no one believed that you could actually raise money online. I know that's crazy. It's something now that I feel like is much more realistic, but at the time, no one believed it. And also there's new platforms that are coming out there. Most people didn't even have an understanding of how to do a campaign. So I was really the first to begin to pioneer this entire concept. But in addition, I started this podcast not only to share stories of people that are being successful on a weekly basis to motivate you, to get you excited, but also to share the tactics, the strategy, the know-how, the resources. What are they actually doing in order to move that lever when it comes to getting funding? What are some of the practical and essential things that go into a powerful campaign launch? That's really, at the end of the day, what I love to do with my website, CrowdCrux, with my books, my courses, this show. I want to share with you things that are practically going to move you forward as a business owner, as a creator, as an entrepreneur, as an inventor, as a creative artist, however it is that you view yourself, right? I really want to help you move that forward, your goalpost and move, into the end zone when it comes to that. So today's episode, I do have to kind of put out a little bit of a warning. And the reason is that people have different backgrounds, different emotions. And today's episode, we talked a little bit about what's called Patreon. So Patreon is a subscription-based crowdfunding website. You can use this site in order to raise money on a recurring basis. Typically, people are supporting around $5 a month, $10 a month, $25 a month. It functions a lot differently than other platforms out there like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, those kinds of sites, GoFundMe, etc. It's more of a recurring income style of crowdfunding. So it's called subscription-based crowdfunding. And again, the site that I'm talking about today is Patreon. Now, in today's episode, we brought on an incredibly successful Patreon campaign creator. So this individual has campaigns, different campaigns that are out there. Some of those have more than 4,000 patrons. We actually have an incredible network as well when it comes to podcasts called MSW Media with many different shows, many different partners, different Patreon campaigns. So they've been able to monetize this in an incredible fashion. And again, that's all monthly recurring revenue, which they're getting consistently as a result of using subscription-based crowdfunding. However, there is also a political slant when it comes to this individual's creations, specifically around the Mueller case and experiences around that. So if you are not an inclination of wanting to listen to something that has a tiny bit of politics there, I don't bring my politics into my business or that kind of stuff. But if you feel a little bit like you don't want to listen to that, maybe you should skip today's episode. But if you want to discover what this individual is doing to build a podcast empire, a massive network of different shows, how they were able to rack up more than 4,000 patrons for one of their campaigns. I think there's a couple thousand for their other one. They have a bunch of other, Patreons and different, podcasts that they're doing out there. So I assume they have even more than that. If you kind of want to get into the brass tacks of how to run a Patreon campaign, launch it from scratch, literally having absolutely no following before that. If you want to learn about that and discover that, you're going to like today's podcast episode. And this is also gearing up to a free course, which I'm actually going to be announcing. This is a free course that walks you through how to do a Patreon campaign, how to set one up, how do you market it, how do you get patrons, all that kind of stuff. And you can check that out at crowdcrux.com/Patreon course. This is a free course that I'm putting out there. I think that it really is needed in the industry. So I'm sharing this information with you with a free course at crowdcrux.com, crowdcrux.com/Patreon course. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Let's get into it and let's discover how this individual was able to build a massive media empire, get recurring revenue through subscription-based crowdfunding, and use that to fuel the upward surge and trajectory when it comes to their business and when it comes to their career. Let's talk about it right now. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. We have a different style episode where we're actually talking about a new topic, which is subscription crowdfunding. And we're speaking with someone who has an incredible campaign out there on Patreon and who is also a podcaster and is doing a lot of cool stuff in the realm of media. I'm so privileged today to welcome Allison to the podcast. Allison, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate your time.
Definitely. Maybe you can fill in some gaps in that intro and just kind of let the listeners know a little bit about you and what you do here.
Well, sure. I spent over a decade working in the Department of Veterans Affairs. I am a disabled Navy veteran. I was in the Navy back in the 90s. And now I am a podcaster. I started off hosting the show Mueller, She Wrote, which was a podcast where you could get all of the information on the Mueller investigation, and we would break it down into enjoyable or more understandable pieces. We would cut through the legalese so that laymen and lay people could understand sort of what was going on. The goal was to keep people apprised of what was happening in the Trump-Russia investigation. And then we'd started a daily news podcast called The Daily Beans. And so then we still do the Daily Beans every weekday morning. And after spending some time out in the podcasting world for a few years with different networks, I decided to start my own network to fix the things that I felt were broken with the system, with the way that a lot of the networks were handling their business. And so we launched MSW Media, and that's where I am now. I tweet on Twitter at Mueller She Wrote. That's my main account. We were just able to get verified there. We've been trying for a few years, but
that's great.
Yeah, so that's where we are. And we have a really, really amazing community of premium subscribers on Patreon and Supercast. And we've been able to do a lot of fundraising for elections. And it's just been a really, really incredible experience with the community that we've built.
What was it that really made you pull the trigger on starting your own podcast and kind of putting your voice out there for the world?
Well, back in 2017, a couple of months after Mueller had been appointed as the special counsel in the Trump-Russia investigation, I noticed they were playing a lot of reruns of documentaries about Watergate on the news channels, and I think they were doing that to show kind of the parallels between Trump-Russia and Watergate, between Trump and Nixon. And I thought to myself, this Trump-Russia investigation seems pretty historic. And I bet in a decade or two, we'll have documentaries on the Trump-Russia investigation as much like we're seeing them in the Watergate investigation now. And I wanted to be part of that. But, I don't have a journalism degree. I don't have a news desk. So I thought to myself, podcasting is probably the way to go. It's accessible to anyone who really wants to start a podcast, which is what's great about the medium. And so that week, I think November 1st of 2017, when the first indictments came down from Robert Mueller against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, we sat down at my kitchen table and recorded the first episode of Mueller, She Wrote. And the rest, I guess, as they say, is history.
So when you really recorded that podcast, I imagine you had so many emotions that were going through you. At what point did it begin to catch on? Was it instant? Was it in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months or years? When did it really begin to catch on, the podcast?
Well, our very first episode, I remember the first day that it came out, we looked and we saw that we had 80 downloads. And we were so excited because most of our friends who were comedians, we started this podcast, women comedians. And, most people get 5, 10, 15 maybe downloads. But each week it doubled and then doubled and doubled again. And within 6 to 8 months, we had a premium podcast that was top 10 in the charts, that was getting, 750,000 downloads a month. It was breathtakingly fast. And I think, honestly, that was because we were really the only podcast dedicated to the Mueller investigation. We were the first to market, and we were filling, apparently, a need that was absent in the marketplace of ideas. So it was really just by sheer luck and a great name. Honestly, Mueller, She Wrote, which a friend of mine came up with, was a great name. So people were interested, they listened, and then they liked what they heard and kept coming back. We didn't spend a dime on marketing. It was all word of mouth. So it was really fast, and we were all quite surprised at the success early on.
What did it feel like to really be launching this from, it sounds like your kitchen or your dining room table, and then, in just a couple of short months, having tons of people around the world be listening to your voice? What did that feel like for you?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I spent a decade as a stand-up comic, and when you're doing comedy in a theater, you get instant feedback from a crowd. But when you're in your kitchen talking into a microphone, nothing really changes, and it sort of allows you to be your authentic self. You're not moved by an instant reaction from an audience. And so to us, this was just a labor of love. We were just in our kitchen talking about something that was really important to us. We didn't plan on any monetization. We were just going to do this kind of for funsies. And so it was, once we got out on the road and we had a tour of about 15 cities or so in 2019, after we'd been podcasting for about a year. It wasn't until we were on stage face to face with sold out crowds that we realized sort of the impact we were having. So
you're creating a movement, really. It sounds
yeah,
like.
and the show was, it's again, just sitting in your kitchen recording what you think. You don't get that kind of feedback, and so it's. I remember being on stage, and they're going wild. They're going wild for this news and this information and these jokes. And I was like, "Is this how y'all act at home when you're listening to the show?" And yeah, it was kind of incredible to have that in your face. That's kind of when it hit all of us how big this was.
Had any of your friends done a podcast before? It sounds like they tried. It sounds like if you're in the comedy circuit, but had any of your friends done podcasts before?
Yeah, tons of friends, tons of comedians doing podcasts, and I didn't want to do a comedy podcast that was about the news. I wanted to do a news podcast that had some comedy in it. And I think that's, a lot of folks in comedy have asked me for advice on how to start their podcasts. And I would say, don't do a comedy podcast. Do a podcast about gardening and be funny. That's find a niche. It's way easier that way because,
Talk about
if you're doing news, yeah, if you do something that you're into, and then be funny, and then be the funniest darn gardening podcast that exists, and you will have a major following. Do you kind of, and plus there's 8 million comedy podcasts you'd be competing with in the charts and all that stuff.
So you sounded like you started this kind of from a passion and really took on a life of its own. When did you really think about monetizing this show that you have put together and now tons of people are listening to around the world?
Well, it sort of went the way that a lot of things in my life have gone. I just sort of do what I love, and then people call me up and say, "Hey, do you want money for this thing that you're doing that you love?" And the same thing happened with podcasts. We started to get contacted by multiple networks who wanted to, monetize. Any podcast out there getting 150,000 downloads per episode. The people who want to make money off your show are going to notice. And so we got a lot of offers. We considered a lot of offers. We decided to stay independent and work with our own ad agencies, who eventually started reaching out to us as well. So they really came to us, honestly. But I think that, the main thing was our Patreon. We started it early, and we offered all kinds of bonus content, and we said, "Hey, if we ever get ads, you'll get an ad-free feed if you're a member of our Patreon." We started out for it was $1 a month, I think, and we would send you stickers and a little handwritten note. It was all personal, and a lot of just great bonus content for the patrons, and we still do that to this day, and it's really worked out well for us. People feel like they're part of a community because they are.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to this Patreon, which you've launched, and now I think you guys have over 1,300 people that are supporting this regularly, was this to give the fans a way to interact with you? Was it to give them a more premium experience? What was kind of the reason behind starting that?
Yeah, and I think we're up around 4,000 or 5,000 now.
Wow.
Was
awesome.
It was. We really wanted to. We noticed there were a lot of people who are really into this information and really were hungry for it and really wanted it. And we thought, this is probably, and this is the same for comedy, it's the same for music. You have a street team, you have super fans, and their word of mouth is what helps you the most. And I feel like they just wanted, again, they wanted those weekly hangout calls with us. They wanted to have access to the VIP meet and greets when we did our tour, which only patrons could get. Whenever I travel, to this day, I'll have meetups where, just come have a cocktail or a mocktail with the host of the Daily Beans. And it's very popular. I think people just want that personal experience. And a lot of folks feel like because they gave early, that they got in on the ground floor and helped the whole community get to where it is today. And that to feel a part of something like that, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, I can imagine just feeling that ownership and like you're kind of on the ground floor, right? And you being the first one to really participate in this and also getting more access to you can be really rewarding feeling. Was that kind of like, you turn this on and then instantly like the floodgates open and you had people starting to join this, or did you kind of have to market that a tiny bit?
We didn't, we marketed it on the show, right? We would say, hey, be a patron. You get this, you get that, you get this. But we didn't do any marketing outside of the show itself. And it wasn't a floodgate open. It was much like the listenership was doubling every month or so. So was the Patreon. And at its height, Mueller, She Wrote, I think, had about 8,000 patrons.
Congratulations.
And of course, thank you. We've since, after the Mueller report came out, the Mueller investigation was mostly over. We still have like Tom Barrack's trial going on right now, but then that sort of went down a little bit and plateaued out, and and people we made it so that if you were a patron of Mueller, She Wrote, you are now a patron of the Daily Beans, and yeah, it's worked out really well. But it was more of a gradual buildup over time than all at once.
Has this allowed you to? I assume you also really enjoy, obviously, doing the comedy. Has this been like a supplemental income stream for you? Is it a whole new business? Has it really now become your full-time job? What part does it play in your life now?
Well, from 2009, actually, the day Obama took office, until March 2020. So what's that? 2.5 years ago, 1.5 years ago, whatever. Math isn't my strong suit.
Me neither.
I worked at the department. I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and I was a GS-14, making a very, very good living, and working as a liaison to the Department of Defense for healthcare purposes. I had gotten a PhD in public health, and then the Trump administration investigated my podcast, investigated Mueller, She Wrote, and had me removed from my job. Because I wasn't loyal to the administration. And by that time, we were doing so well that the income that we were all making from the podcast was enough to live off of for all of us. And so
that's wild.
Yeah, so that it is now the main source of income. And of course, we've created the network, MSW Media. And, monetization is number 2 or 3 on our list of important things. Our number one thing is to grow the community and educate and inform everyone about social justice issues, justice, politics, news, arts. But it's so far it's been enough to sustain us all. Our little shop of a handful of employees.
If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist, and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist, fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. Do you view yourself as a public figure, as an entrepreneur, as a businesswoman? How do you really view yourself?
That's hard because I also have imposter syndrome. But I view myself as an entrepreneur. I view myself as a public figure, a politics, a pundit, and perhaps a journalist, or maybe, at least a reporter, because I don't really break news. I report it, but I do it with jokes and appropriate profanity, so people like to listen to it. I think one of my greatest strengths is to be able to take relatively boring or complex subjects and make them palatable for your human consumption so people can stay up
That's
on the
actually,
news.
yeah, that's super important. Super
So yeah,
important.
people can stay up on the news without being depressed and overwhelmed.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. So I mean, to be an entrepreneur and to be able to do something and kind of quit your job, or in this case, have this be kind of your fallback plan, and this becoming your main source of income, that's huge. I mean, that's incredible. Now you're launching these other companies. That sounds super exciting. For people that are listening to this, you're like, wow, like this woman is absolutely crushing it. Do you have any advice when it comes to launching a Patreon or marketing it, or really getting your first patrons when it comes to doing something you're passionate about?
Yeah, like I said, find something find a gap, that's something that's missing, something that somebody's not talking about, and fill it, and be authentic about it. I have found the best advice I can give people is to work hard, because it is a lot of hard work, and be kind, and be transparent, and just be authentically yourself. I find that it took me, it took me a couple of decades to find my voice, but once I did, I think people would be very surprised that everybody wants to listen to your story and your authentic self, and you can build a community that way, a really, really supportive community.
It sounds like the other thing you've been really good at, just kind of looking through your campaign, is having things like Facebook groups, having things like newsletter, right? Having social media. It sounds like that's also been important. Would you agree?
Yeah, and one of the greatest lessons that I've ever learned is that it's important to feel like you're not alone. It's one of the most powerful motivators. And for thousands of people who felt or feel alone in their beliefs about the news, the fact that they want to swear about it, the fact that sometimes there's comedy in it, to be part of that community is to feel like you're not alone. And when you feel like you're not alone, you cannot be gaslit. You can't be lied to anymore. It's a very powerful feeling. And I think that is where the draw is. And that would, always be my recommendation to people, is to find a way to help others feel like they're not alone.
I love that. It's kind of also giving people a place, right? Almost like a home to kind of come home to in that way. And
Mhm.
just kind of looking as well at your campaign, I think coming up with these reward tiers and these ways of involving fans can be kind of difficult. Like, have you changed that over time, or have they been all the same pretty much since you got started?
It's been the same pretty much since we got started, except we got rid of the $1 a month tier because I was told by several people, "Hey, you're worth more than that." So I think our minimum is $3 a month now. But it's always been the same. At the entry level, you get the digital stuff, you get the ad-free feed, you get the newsletter, which contains all the sources that I cite in my news reporting and the podcast, and you get access to our bi-weekly, twice a month Zoom happy hour where you can ask me anything, and then it goes up from there. Every level has all those things, but as it goes up, like you can get Daily Beans mugs, you can get a Crimes and Crimes and Crimes shirt, you can get, depending on your level, or you can just not be a patron, listen to it for free, and buy those things from our store if you want. So it's there's just a lot of different options, and I think people appreciate the options, and I think that's one of the reasons that our community is so tight knit.
Yeah, and I think also it allows people to kind of show, how much they enjoy what it is that you're doing, right? So maybe having some swag, or being a part of and getting news before anyone else, right? And being able to interact directly with you. There's that kind of feeling of belonging, like you mentioned before, and also showcasing those messages, right, which they care about.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. You reminded me. If you're a patron, you get the show early, before it goes public, and you also get to hear some of the bloopers and B-roll and behind the scenes discussions, or maybe full video Zoom calls, unedited, of some of the bigger interviews that I do. So yeah, you definitely get a lot of bonus content. But again, yeah, it's that feeling of community that people really need and people really love and enjoy. And it's one of my favorite things. It was one of the perfect, beautiful, unintended consequences of starting this whole project was this just incredible community of listeners, of like-minded people being together and having each other to rely on. We do a lot for each other, not just listen to podcasts together.
Have you ever considered using other forms of crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or raising capital for your new business? Or have you ever considered using other forms of crowdfunding?
We have done a couple of things, like with GoFundMe when we wanted to put on a live election show in the midterms in 2018, and we didn't have the money to produce it video-wise. We did a little Kickstarter that got us about a third of the way there, which was nice, and it, helped us with a chunk of that. But we haven't really done any other crowdsource, fundraising for anything else. We've pretty much been able to have the money to do that from our patrons and from ad revenue. But we have started fundraising campaigns for politics. We did it in 2020, where we grouped together with a few other podcasts, and we raised about $500,000 for our candidates of choice in Georgia and for president and vice president. And then this year, for the midterms, we started a great fund through the How We Win podcast, which uses Swing Left, which kind of takes it. What it does is it takes your money, 100% of it, and gives it to the candidates who are running in winnable races. Because, a lot of people just throw their money over to great candidates who can't win, or candidates who have so much money they won't ever be able to spend it. This does all the math and crunches all the numbers. So they find the 10 most candidates in most need who have winnable seats, and donates 100% of the proceeds to them. And we're over $100,000 now on that.
Congratulations! That's a huge. I mean, I think you guys are pretty close to your goal with that one too, almost.
Well, our goal was 50,000, then it was 100,000, and now we're going to up it to 200,000. I mean, everybody keeps blowing away our expectations, and everybody loves that 100% of the money goes to the candidates who need it the most, so that they don't have to think about that, right? They want to get the most bang for their buck, and this is what mathematically helps them do that.
For someone listening to this and hearing your ability to take this community which you've developed and build MSW Media, being able to fund political candidates that you like, being able to have recurring income when it comes to Patreon, is it really as easy as you think that this is like you were in the right place at the right time, or do you think there's also something to your ability to like direct a crowd and like speak to a crowd? Do you feel like anyone could do this, or is this really kind of like a phenomenon almost?
I think it's maybe half and half. Like we were in the right place at the right time. We were the only podcast that was doing anything about the Mueller investigation. And word of mouth was intense, and everybody was upset and needed to not feel alone. And I have 10 years in government, 10 years in comedy, an MBA. I was just kind of also right place, right time. But again, I have put a lot of hard work and kindness into this, and that matters. And that leads me to believe anybody can do this. Podcasting is so accessible. Anybody can do this. It's a matter of kind of putting out a great product, putting out something that people want. But, honestly, if you have something that you want to talk about and you have a passion for, and you put your heart into it and you work hard and you're kind to people, I feel like anybody could do this.
What is your goal with MSW Media? How do you see this working into your future, and how do you see this interfacing with all the things you're doing right now?
At some point, I've thought about this a lot, because I've had accountants advise me, like, hey, this network, you've got people to run it. You could just sit back and not do anything and get a little passive income.
Live on the beach, sip a pina colada.
Right. But I have to tell you, if I were retired, this is what I would be doing. This is what I love. And so I'm going to continue podcasting as long as people continue to listen. and put together groups of incredible independent podcasters and help promote and grow their shows and hopefully be a mentor to others. I think that's about that time in my life when my goals are to help others achieve what they want to achieve. And so perhaps there'll be some sort of consulting down the line. But I don't know. Right now, this is pretty much, I feel so blessed, and it's incredible what
you've been able to do and accomplish, for sure.
Yeah.
Just as a clarification question. So would you say that, MSW Media, you're kind of trying to launch multiple different shows now with other hosts and use this system you developed to, grow their audience and monetize their audience? Is that kind of the vision there?
That's exactly it. We have, I think, over 20 shows now at mswmedia.com that we work with, and we're partnering with other networks to help promote their shows, and they in turn help promote our shows, like the Midas Touch Network or the Sexy Liberal Podcast Network with Stephanie Miller. So it's really just this trying to counter kind of what's going on in politics on the other side with this, by joining forces, as it were.
And is everyone monetizing the same way that you do when it comes to having, ads and Patreon? Is that similar with all of these shows, which you are now under that umbrella?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of them already do that, have enough, downloads and have enough reach to do that. Some of them don't have that reach yet, and I'm helping advise them on how to get that reach. And, our network offers public relations and marketing and social media management and all kinds of really great things. Like I said, our number one goal here isn't necessarily monetization. It's to get the word out and to amplify voices, important voices in news and social justice, politics, and the arts.
So cool. So cool. Do you have any final words or a link you would like to send people who would like to learn more about what you're doing and some of your content?
Yeah, I would just say follow me on Twitter at Muller She Wrote. Explicit language warning sometimes, everyone. And you can listen to the Daily Beans every weekday morning, News with Swearing, myself and Dana Goldberg, who's an incredible comedian and activist. And definitely check out MSW Media. See all of our shows. If you have a show or if you have an idea, there's a contact page there. Let me know. I'm happy to help you.
And my final question for you, and we can end the show on this note, is if you could speak directly to listeners, and maybe a person who is now thinking of sitting around their kitchen table, or they are thinking of doing something more else creative or getting their voice out there. Maybe you could end with either a word of encouragement, a final quote that you like, something that someone else has told you that's kind of stuck with you, anything along those lines.
Yeah, two things. You're not alone. Help others realize they're not alone. And one of my favorite quotes from Twitter, I didn't write this, but it's great. In a world of performative cruelty, kindness is punk AF. Be punk AF.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate you, and good luck with all of your future endeavors here.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you for what you do. It's so important.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. As I always say on this show, we like to talk about different styles of crowdfunding, whether that's subscription-based crowdfunding like today and websites like Patreon, get into more rewards-based crowdfunding, which is more of like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, equity crowdfunding, which we think of like WeFunder, Start Engine, those kinds of sites, even nonprofit crowdfunding and fundraising, which are like GoFundMe, etc. I really try to bring my A game to you when it comes to doing these shows and bring you information that is going to move you forward, practical, tactical, useful, so that way you can be more successful when it comes to launching a campaign out there. And also, you're just staying abreast, you're staying knowledgeable about those trends, about what actually is working today when it comes to crowdfunding. So I got two quick announcements for you. The first is, if you are interested in learning more about Patreon, how it works, whether or not this is for you, and if you're already even sold on doing one of these campaigns, you're like, dude, I just want to know, what do I got to do to get patrons and like actually get traffic, and how do I launch this thing? Go and check out my free Patreon course at crowdcrux.com/Patreon course. That link is crowdcrux.com/Patreon course. Again, that link is crowdcrux.com/Patreon course, Patreon course. So that link will take you there, and really it's going to walk you through the step-by-step of what you need to know when it comes to launching a campaign, marketing it, getting patrons, and kind of like the bread and butter, if you will, that goes into a successful campaign, one that allows you to have recurring income, really take advantage of the power of subscription-based crowdfunding, and you can learn more about that at crowdcrux.com/Patreon course. In addition, if you've been listening to this episode and you're kind of a little bit unsure, and actually I get this a lot of people are like, Sal, you know what? That sounds exciting. So we talk about Patreon, we talk about Kickstarter, we talk about WeFunder, we talk about Started, we talk about all these platforms. My head is just dizzy. I'm like, I don't even know what the best course of action is to, or maybe I have an idea of it, but I just kind of want to bounce off some ideas when it comes to you and really understand, is this something that I should do? If I should do it, what is the strategy? How do I go about executing this? And ideally, you also have a little bit of a budget that you've set aside to be able to fuel this expansion when it comes to your business that you're setting up, that you're growing, that you're looking to get out there. Or if you're trying to be an influencer, you're trying to be a podcaster, you're trying to be someone who's online like a YouTuber, and you want to use even Patreon for that. You also have built in a budget to really, I think, invest into your career, right? And to be able to do this the right way. If that sounds something that's interesting to you, I do have an option, which is an individual intensive coaching call. So these calls I typically do with people that are looking to launch campaigns. We talk a lot about strategy, we talk a lot about tactics, resources, things that you need to do, kind of also diagnose even whether you should do this, what is the best platform. If you're going out there and you have a little bit of uncertainty as well, some of the things that are going to help you when it comes to making sure you get more funded than you actually thought. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go and check out this form at crowdcrux.com/coaching. So that's actually, you can fill out some information there when it comes to what are you trying to accomplish, where are you doing this campaign from? Give me just a little bit more information about you so I can be more helpful, and check that out at crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link will take you there. And in addition, like I said, I try to make these extremely useful for you. They are intensive, so only book this if you're serious. Also, if you have a little bit of a budget, because there is an investment when it comes to that. And if you want to work in a longer term fashion or even get some help with execution, we can also talk about that at the end of the call. But they're designed to be useful, and also designed to bring my A game, right, when it comes to doing those calls. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm looking to even bring on some more Patreon campaign creators from different categories. So I think this will be a really exciting kind of addition to the already buffet of different style of episodes we have on this podcast, which you can check out, go and dive into the archives, check out more, look at some other success stories, and hopefully it really gets that kind of fire in your belly going to launch a campaign, to get something out there, and to really move faster towards your dreams, whether that's getting a new product into the world, raising funds so you can actually do a creative project of some kind, raising capital with an equity crowdfunding campaign, getting subscription, recurring based income, whatever it is that you want to do. Hopefully this episode has been helpful and useful for you. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman, and I will see you next time.